Hello and welcome to DSR Daily. I'm David Rothkopf and I'm joined by Riley Fessler. How are you, Riley?
Good. It's about to cool off in DC, which it can be nothing but good.
Yeah, I'll say working out in this temperature has been brutal, absolutely brutal. And yes, for those of you skeptics, I do work out in this temperature. I mean, you don't get to look like this, without putting in the hours. Okay, Riley, I see you smirking.
We're very
That's
fitness forward here at the DSR network. It's
Yeah,
true.
that's true. That's true. Because we we know that fighting all this craziness could go on for a long time, and we're going to need our energy. Anyway, start us off.
Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada will recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in September, joining a growing list of Western nations taking symbolic steps amid global outrage over the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The move is conditional on the Palestinian Authority holding elections in 2026 without Hamas participation and committing to demilitarization. Carney emphasized the urgency of preserving the two-state solution while acknowledging the complex and long-term nature of achieving a viable Palestinian state. Although largely symbolic, Canada's recognition aligns with the recent decisions by France and the UK and increases diplomatic pressure on Israel, whose government firmly rejects a two-state framework.
Yeah. And of course, Donald Trump responded to it with a Truth Social post this morning, Thursday morning, in which he said, noted that Canada did this and said this will make it harder to achieve a trade deal with Canada. I think this may be covering for the fact that it may be harder to reach a trade deal with Canada anyway. But it also illustrates that the United States is still on the wrong side of this issue. Canada, the UK, and France, of course, are not outliers. The majority of nations in the world, over 140 nations, have agreed to recognize the Palestinian state or recognize the Palestinian state. I think a subtext of this story is that there is increasing pressure within the Palestinian community for Hamas to step down, step aside, get out of the picture, have one unified leadership. That was one of the reasons having the division in the leadership between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas was one of the reasons that the Israelis initially supported Hamas. They wanted division. But I think there are those in the Palestinian community, those in the Arab world, those who are sympathetic to them, who realize that this is a moment of opportunity. Global public opinion has shifted. And given Hamas's terrorist past and their terrible record, by the way, governing in Gaza, that it's time for them to step aside and create the kind of or seize the opportunity that currently may exist for Palestinians, given the world support. We'll have to track that closely, and we will.
President Trump announced a new so-called trade deal with South Korea, reducing planned U.S. tariffs on Korean imports from 25% to 15% in exchange for a $350 billion South Korean investment in the U.S. and $100 billion in energy purchases. South Korea agreed to open its markets to more American products, though it maintained protections for its rice and beef sectors. The supposed deal was politically significant for newly elected South Korean President Lee Jae-myung and aimed to stabilize relations amid U.S. concerns about trade imbalances and defense costs. While the agreement was hailed as a major win by both sides, some key details, like how the investment will be implemented, remain unclear.
Yeah, that's because all these deals have big bullshit components because Trump doesn't really care about having the deals. He cares about making it look like he's having deals. That's the issue with Trump. Everything about him is appearances. It's like his hair, he doesn't have much, but he wants it to look like he has a lot of hair. So he puts it on his head and then he sprays it and then he combs it and then he sprays it some more and then it looks like hair, but it's not really a lot of hair. He's basically a bald guy pretending to have hair. The same is true with these deals. The details aren't agreed to. The big components they're talking about, like these investment programs and so forth, are off in the future, will happen, after Trump is, out of office, God willing. and or were things that were already planned for in the beginning. This is just a show being put on in order to placate the Mad King by the rest of the world community, which is sniggering behind the scenes, going, "This guy's nuts. Let's placate him. The next guy or woman who comes in will get rid of these remaining ridiculous tariffs that have U.S. tariffs right now at a level that they have not seen in 100 years or so, not since the Great Depression, the Smoot-Hawley tariffs, which were a disaster and considered one of the reasons that the Depression went on as long as it did. This is disastrous. And of course, one of the bootlickers within the Trump administration, the person who is the architect of this insanity, Peter Navarro, went on TV in the past 24 hours and said, "You know, a lot of people are talking about Donald Trump to win the Nobel Peace Prize." Nobody is. They should be talking about him getting the Nobel Prize in Economics for teaching the world about trade economics. Right. The only way Donald Trump is going to get a Nobel Prize is if they introduce a Nobel Prize in corruption, pedophilia, or lying. Those are categories he'd have a shot. The rest of it, ridiculous.
Well, keeping things on trade, kind of, the United States escalated tensions with Brazil by imposing 50% tariffs and sanctioning Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes over his role in prosecuting former President Jair Bolsonaro. The tariffs exempt many key Brazilian exports and signal U.S. support for Bolsonaro, whom Trump claims is being politically persecuted. Brazilian President Lula condemned the move as an attack on national sovereignty and warned it could spark a trade war, though he remains open to trade negotiations. The sanctions issued under the Global Magnitsky Act are an unprecedented act against a democratic ally and mark a major foreign policy clash between the Trump and Lula administrations.
Yeah, this is insanity. Bolsonaro was a really bad guy. Trump likes him because he wanted to be like Trump. Bolsonaro led a coup. They're prosecuting him. President Lula has said, if January 6th took place in Brazil, they would be prosecuting Trump, which makes me think maybe we should import a few Brazilian prosecutors to the United States. Perhaps they would have had a little bit more spine and sense of the threat posed by having a political actor who thinks committing a coup is, an acceptable path. But this is terrible for U.S. relations with Brazil. It's illegal. It's a real affront to, the sovereignty of Brazil. It's an assault on the sovereignty of Brazil. And what do you think is going to happen? The relationship will remain bad. Trump doesn't think it matters. Brazil is the largest country in Latin America, and Brazil will make ties with other countries. Well, what's the leading trading partner with most of Latin America right now? What's the leading investment partner with most of Latin America right now? For those of you who would say it's the United States because this is the Western Hemisphere, you are incorrect. The leading trading partner is China, and China will step in, step up, increase its influence in the region. And this is what reveals the absolute reckless idiocy of this Trump approach, quite apart from its immorality and illegal nature.
The Trump administration reached a deal with Brown University to restore federal funding in exchange for changes to its diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, as well as compliance with new federal guidelines on gender and campus programming. Unlike Columbia University, which agreed to a $221 million settlement, Brown avoided federal fines and will instead invest $50 million over 10 years in Rhode Island workforce development programs. The agreement includes commitments not to engage in unlawful racial discrimination, adopt Trump-era definitions of gender for certain programs, and restrict gender-affirming care for minors. Brown President Christina Paxson emphasized that most provisions align with existing policies, but acknowledged some terms reflect federal priorities rather than past violations.
Yeah, well, not so fast there, Brown. There's some provisions in this agreement that are terrible. For example, Brown has agreed that all the student evaluations of faculty will be reviewed, and any that accuse faculty members of anti Semitism will be referred to the federal government. I wouldn't teach there. That gives the student a power who doesn't like a professor, doesn't like a grade that they got, to effectively turn in the professor and make their life a living hell. There are other provisions for reviewing processes within Brown that I just, if I were a potential student or I were a potential faculty member or I were a current student or I were a current faculty member, I would say, I don't want to participate in this. I don't want to give work at a school or teach at a school or attend a school where the federal government has review over these things and has the ability to impose its will. We also know it's a slippery slope. We also know that with Trump, no deal is the last deal. And giving any sign of weakness like this. And frankly, Columbia and Brown, there's talk of Harvard also considering doing this kind of thing. That this is, a bit of a trend. If it continues, it will dramatically reduce academic freedom in the United States. And it will super empower the government that will, say, look, these leading schools have done this, you have to do this too, in a direction that will get them going after things other than the quote anti-Semitism or DEI issues that they're currently concerned with. And what's next in line, as we have said? What about climate science? What about science in general, given the views of this administration towards things like vaccines or biological research? This is a crisis for First Amendment rights in the United States of America. And unfortunately, the institutions which should be standing up for those rights, universities, media outlets, law firms, many of them are folding. Many of them are bending the knee. And that's where I get really worried, because I say this is not about Trump. This is about institutional rot across the United States of America, institutional rot that can continue for many years and can really usher in a new era in the United States in which we are much less free, much less democratic country.
Former Vice President Kamala Harris announced she will not run for governor of California, choosing instead to focus on supporting Democrats and considering future opportunities outside elected office. Her decision follows months of deliberation and is seen as a move to keep the door open for a potential 2028 presidential run. Harris is now exploring nonprofit work, possibly launching a political action committee, and plans to remain active in national political conversations. Her withdrawal leaves the California governor's race wide open, with several prominent Democrats already vying to succeed term-limited Governor Gavin Newsom.
It's the right decision. I'm not sure whether she will be a candidate in 2028 or not. I thought she was a good candidate. I think the narrative around her candidacy is deeply misleading at the moment. She had less time than any candidate. She did a lot of things very well. She very nearly won the election. There are irregularities that we could talk about at some future time that raise some questions about the vote in some places. But this was not a blowout. This was not a disaster on her part. I think there's some things that Democrats could have done that would have assured they won the election that they didn't do. But I don't put any blame at all on Harris for the way she conducted herself on the campaign trail. Should she have picked some different campaign advisors and made some different priorities? Yeah, I think so. But given the circumstances, it was a remarkable performance. And she is an important voice within the party. She's a historical figure within the United States. We should not lose sight of that. And as for who's going to be the candidate in 2028, that's 1 million years from now. Nobody knows. We have to see what the trends are in this country, what the issues are in this country, and who steps up. I hope she steps up. I'd like to hear more from her. I hope this frees her up to be one of the active voices in the Democratic Party. We need more of those. Well, that's it. It's a Thursday, one more day in this week, but it's the last day of July, which I feel a little sad about. My wife has a bit of a sweater fetish, and she's been going around going, "It's almost fall." It's, let's be clear, okay? There's still a whole month of summer left. It's not almost fall. Let's enjoy what remains of the summer, even though this year it's a little bit ugly, if you really want to know the truth, because Memorial Day is September 1st, I think. I mean, you don't, sometimes it goes into, you get a whole other week of summer because Memorial Day is a little later. So it's truncated. My advice to you, enjoy August. It's the summer. Enjoy summer things. Okay, Riley, would you do that?
I can do that.
Okay, I knew you. I knew you could do that. Our friend Minna, who normally is with us, is doing just that, but she'll be back on Monday. In any event, join us for all the other things we've got. There's a new Need to Know podcast that's just been made available with Tim Weiner about his book, The Mission on the CIA. Strongly encourage you to listen to that. And we did a very, very important episode of Deep State Radio yesterday, which focused on the situation in Gaza. We had with us the president of Refugees International, Jeremy Konyndyk. It was the kind of serious, in-depth discussion of Gaza you're not getting elsewhere. Please take the time, join us for that episode. And if you like what we're doing, go to the dsrnetwork.com, click membership, and become a member. Help support what we're doing. Until you do that, we'll be here working away, and we'll be back with you again tomorrow. Thanks, Riley. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.